There is no fight card that was better. This one was the ultimate. For real. Guys, welcome to episode 20. Let's have a conversation. Today's conversation is informed by a post I saw on the UFC's YouTube page a couple of days ago. They asked a question about the greatest fight card. Which was the greatest fight card? And that really got me thinking, right? What is the greatest UFC fight card I have ever seen in my entire life? And I've been watching MMA for a pretty long time. What is the greatest fight card of the UFC? What is the greatest show the UFC has ever put out? And coming off UFC 300, this year, it makes this conversation all the more relevant when you consider how much buzz UFC 300 had. Some have even called it the greatest UFC fight card of all time. But is it though? Is UFC 300 the greatest fight card of all times? Let's go down the rabbit hole. There's a strong argument to be made that there are other cards in the past that may or may not be better than UFC 300. We have UFC 100. It's a pretty good card. UFC 200, that was also bad as well. UFC 229, I think we'll also add that to the list. UFC 300 and UFC 217 would be a very strong addition to the list as well. Of all these fight cards, we know UFC 229, Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor. I think that is arguably the biggest pay-per-view card with the most intense and authentic rivalry in the history of the UFC. It all started with the incident at the bus. Actually, no, I take that back. It all started with the incident with Khabib and his team running up on Artem Lobov. Oh, you know what? I might take that back. Let's take it further back. UFC 229 started with, actually, technically speaking, if you think about it, UFC 229 started with Artem Lobov coming online and giving an interview where he mentions Khabib Nurmagomedov's name in certain issues. That incident led to Khabib and his crew confronting Artem in the hotel lobby that he was seen at some point. And Conor McGregor saw that, got pretty angry, got a couple of goons, got on a plane from Ireland, flew to the US to cause chaos, and flew right back to Ireland, if I believe. Big mess. That was the origin of UFC 229. And we all saw that that incident transcended into very terrible statements, a very toxic pre-fight narrative, pre-fight shenanigans that were probably the most out of this world. When you talk about free speech, Conor McGregor was given the free hand and free speech to say anything he wanted about Khabib Nurmagomedov's parents and family and religion and country, and the list goes on and on. So that's UFC 229. It ended up being the highest selling UFC pay-per-view, and I believe it did more than 2.4 million pay-per-views. You can't argue about that. You really can't. There's also a strong argument to be made for UFC 300. With everything that happened, the build-up to the fights, the back and forths, the delays in fight announcements from Dana White, the what-ifs, the variables, who's going to fight, who isn't going to fight. We were all glued to our screen waiting for the official announcement, and then we find out it's Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill. And to be quite honest, a lot of us thought that it would be Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. And then you add the addition of the BMF belt to UFC 300. And it was a beauty to see. One of the most viral knockouts came out. Actually, two viral knockouts came out from that fight card. So these are strong numbers. These are strong arguments. Same thing could be said for the merits of UFC 100, UFC 200, and all. However, I want to push all that to the side. I am clearing the path to make my argument for UFC 217 as the greatest UFC fight card in the history of mixed martial arts. Yep, that is my pick. UFC 217. And unfortunately, a lot of people are sleeping on UFC 217. I don't know if it's because UFC 217 was such a long time ago, you know, by recency bias. Yes, I would say it's a very long time ago. 2017 was about, what was that? 7 years ago, right? What year are we? My math sucks. Let's not go into the math of it all. But yeah, it was about that far back, right? A lot of people don't remember the greatness that we witnessed on the night of UFC 217. It was a glorious night. It was fantastic. Mixed martial arts legend Georges St-Pierre, arguably one of the greatest mixed martial artists of all time, period, across weight divisions, one of the greatest to ever do it, GSP, came out of retirement to fight the reigning middleweight champion at the time, Michael the Count Bisping. And Michael Bisping had just won the belt from Luke Rockhold, and I think he had defended it against Dan Anderson in their second fight. So Bisping was on the tier, was a dominant champion, and it was a chance for him to prove himself as one of the greatest by eliminating one of the greatest to ever do it in Georges St-Pierre. Now, GSP, in my personal opinion, really had no real motivation for me in coming back out of retirement to fight. I felt at the time that GSP was just one of those people who, you know what, you guys know how when fighters retire, especially if they retire in good health and they're young, they retire and then have this little FOMO syndrome, the fear of missing out. So I felt like GSP wanted to come back to just relive the moment, rehash the feeling of the crowd, the attention that he gets, the adrenaline rush from fighting. That's what I thought GSP wanted to do. So at the time, I didn't think that fight made any sense to me, because there were other contenders that Michael Bisping had in the middleweight division who could have fought for the belt. Now, that was the main event for UFC 217. But here's what else makes UFC 217 very, very, very special. UFC 217 had 2 more title fights other than the main event. So there was a bantamweight championship on the line with Cody Garbrandt, who was a champion at the time, versus TJ Dillashaw, who was the contender. Right? TJ had been on a tear to reclaim his belt after losing that belt to, I believe he lost it to Dominic Cruz. I'm not sure. I can't remember. I think it was Dominic Cruz. But TJ was back for his belt. Then in the same night, we had the title fight between strawweight champion, female champion, Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Tug Rose Namajunas. Joanna had been on a very, very, very dominant reign, very long reign, and a very, very, very impressive run as champion with multiple title defenses. Probably, I think she had the longest, I believe at the time it was the longest title defense of a female champion at the time. Probably that record might still hold up today. I'm gonna have to check my stats. Guys, these were all the fights we had, all the championship fights we had on the same card. 3 championship fights. Now, I'm sure a lot of you who remember would say, well, it's not the first fight card to have 3 championship fights on the line, and you're right. If history serves me well, I believe UFC 33, UFC 205, and UFC 214 all had 3 championship fights on the line in the same fight card. Each one of them had that. However, the one thing that made UFC 217 really stand out is what separates it from the rest of the fight cards as a whole, and the rest of the fight cards that put up 3 championship fights in the same night. Let me run a few stats from UFC 217. On that night, there was 5 bonuses were given out on the night of UFC 217. 3 performance bonuses on the main event, and I believe there were 2 performance of the night bonuses from the prelims. That was between the fight with OSP, I believe, and Ricardo Lamas, I believe that fight had a bonus of the night. So essentially there were 5 bonuses of the night. 5 bonuses with performance of the night. That may not sound like a big deal, but when last did you see a UFC event with 5 performance of the night bonuses? Granted, UFC 300 just had the highest performance of the night bonuses awarded, and highest I meant highest in pay, highest in financial number, 300K. And Max Holloway took 2 bonuses that night, fight of the night and I believe performance of the night. Max got 600K, guys. It was well worth it. Let's not argue about that, right? So UFC 217 had 5 performance of the night bonuses. You still don't think that's spectacular? Okay, then let's talk about numbers. Let's talk about more numbers. UFC 217 had over 1 million pay-per-view buys. Guys, those are fucking good numbers. Those are fantastic numbers. By 2024 standards and by 2017 standards, regardless of inflation or what the UFC pay-per-view price was at the time. It wasn't $85 plus taxes that it is today. It was much less then, but it was still fairly decent. I think it was 65 plus taxes at the time. Not sure. Might have been. Right? And on another thing, more numbers for you guys. On the fight card, I believe they had it was damn it, probably maybe 10. I believe it was 10 finishes on the prelims and main card. 10 stoppages on the prelims and main card, with only 2 decisions on that entire card coming by decision wins. Only 2. Most of it was stoppages. I'm saving the best for last, as if you don't already know. For those of you who are real MMA fans with very good memories, not suffering from the recency bias, you understand where I'm heading with this. Right? Now, this is the ultimate reason why UFC 217 was the greatest ever fight card I've ever seen. Leading up to the fight, you had 3 champions and 3 very clear contenders. There were no issues with the people who were supposed to fight the champions. We didn't have any issue. We're like, okay, you know what? Those are fights we want to see. 3 of them. You had the champion Cody Garbrandt of the bantamweight division. You had Joanna Jędrzejczyk, the strawweight champion, and then you had the middleweight champion Michael Bisping. What is the common denominator with these 3 champions? They could talk some trash. They could talk a lot of shit. All of them. You'll be hard pressed to find a better trash talker than Michael Bisping. I believe in the UFC, one of the greatest trash talker in the history of the UFC is Michael Bisping. He's right there, up there behind Chael Sonnen and Conor McGregor. In fact, I think Chael is the first and the best. Conor is second. And Michael Bisping is a very strong third. As a trash talker. I'm trying to think off the top of my head who else I could put on that list. But probably I'll do another video with the best trash. Actually, you know what? I will do another video with the best trash talkers in UFC history. My personal favorites. But back to UFC 217 and the trash-talking abilities of the champions who were putting their belts on the line to defend on that night. These guys talked a lot of shit. They engaged in a lot of mental warfare with their opponents. If you know GSP and you watch GSP's history of fighting, for those of you who can remember, you ever noticed GSP wasn't really a trash talker? He's very professional. He wants to get the job done in a professional manner. He was very competitive, but also very respectful to his opponents. GSP never really trash talks. Right? The second person who was a trash talker was Cody Garbrandt on that night, because Cody was such a confident champion. He had just come off completely obliterating Dominic Cruz. It was not even a problem. It wasn't even close. Cody Garbrandt completely humiliated Dominic Cruz in their fight. And Dominic Cruz at the time was a very hard puzzle to solve in the bantamweight division. And Cody made him look like an amateur. So Cody was coming there with that young stud energy, riding off a high over a dominant performance of a former champion that nobody could decipher at the time. And then there was now an extra level of bad blood between Cody Garbrandt and TJ Dillashaw. Because at the time, TJ Dillashaw had left Cody's training camp and team, which was Team Alpha Male. And Team Alpha Male is the MMA team, training team put together or set up by Uriah Faber, the California kid, the California boy. Uriah Faber, former champion of the bantamweight division. Uriah Faber had that team, and Cody Garbrandt was a member of the team, and TJ Dillashaw was a member of the team who at the time left the team with Dwayne Ludwig, his head coach, and they started doing their own training on their own. So words were said, things were misinterpreted, and then there was that beef, in the background. So it was a case of Team Alpha Male versus Team Ludwig, as represented by the champion Cody Garbrandt and the contender TJ Dillashaw on the other side. And I can tell you for free, when it came to trash talking, Cody went in on TJ Dillashaw. I've never seen a more impressive Cody Garbrandt trash talking. It was good. It was enjoyable to watch. The trash talking went a bit further. Also, in the women's division, with Joanna Jędrzejczyk talking down on Tug Rose Namajunas. And at the time, you guys know Rose. Rose is always very composed. Rose doesn't trash talk. Rose is very professional. If anybody trash talks, it should be Pat Barry. But Rose is the direct opposite of Pat Barry in terms of trash talking. She's very calm, very respectful, very professional, and always wants to just get in there, show and display her martial arts, hopefully get the W and leave. I think Tug Rose is actually allergic to fame, if I can put it that way. She just doesn't like fame. So you're not going to see Tug Rose trash talking. It's not just her thing. And I think that quiet disposition encouraged Joanna to continue to trash talk her, to continue to be in her face, to come up in the press conference, and I think it was the weigh-ins, I believe. Right? The weigh-ins or the face-off, I believe Joanna literally put her hand on Tug Rose's face. Coming there and acting like I'm the boogie lady. Boogie woman. Bow down to the queen, bow down. Who remembers that?
Bow down, I'm the real queen, Dana.
But bow down on your knees. Because
Lord. Who remembers? You guys remember that. You know what I'm saying. Bow down to the queen. Such confidence. We were all hyped for those fights. All hype. And this was the same card that also had Stephen Wonderboy Thompson versus Jorge Masvidal. Now, granted, Masvidal wasn't as big at the time, but it was big enough where it's like, I want to see those fights. Masvidal at the time was that fight was on the main card, right? Wasn't a prelim fight, and amongst and many others. Now, the most remarkable thing about UFC 217 was that every single champion on that fight card lost their belt to the contenders. All via stoppage, and all via stoppage in 3 rounds or less. First person up, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, Joanna versus Todd Rose. Rose takes her out in under 2 minutes. New champion, strawweight division for women. Next up, co-main event, bantamweight championship, TJ Dillashaw versus Cody Garbrandt. TJ takes Cody out, I believe, in the 2nd round by TKO. Face down, ass up, in spectacular fashion. And I wouldn't even lie, that was a fight that won me over to TJ Dillashaw's side as a fighter, not as a cheater. Don't get me wrong, I do not support cheating and the PED performance, so I'm going to put that out there. But in terms of fighter IQ and fight style, I like Dillashaw's fight style. I'm just saying. Yes, he cheated, but the fight IQ is still there, and performance-enhancing drugs do not help your fight IQ. Next up, George St. Pierre versus Michael Bisping, with all the trash talk in there. GSP fights Bisping the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd round, and in the 3rd round is able to get a rear naked choke on Michael Bisping. Now, if you ever wanted to know whether or not Michael Bisping is a badass, other than the fact that Michael Bisping fought several times with one eye, if you ever wanted to know that Michael Bisping was a badass, watch the last round between himself versus George St. Pierre, and GSP got a rear naked choke on Bisping. And Bisping would not tap out. Remarkable. Michael Bisping literally slept and died on his shield. He refused to tap out until GSP put him to sleep, until the referee literally came to save him. My man refused to bow out that way. Gangster behavior. With all these things and all these facts and all these intricacies and variables I've stated, how can you tell me UFC 217 is not the greatest card of all time? The most valid argument against this will probably be UFC 229. Because UFC 229, Conor versus Khabib, it did more numbers in terms of pay-per-view sales. UFC 217 did about 1 million pay-per-view buys, and UFC 229 did about 2.4 million pay-per-view buys. Right? You can't compare those two numbers. That's 140%. 140%. increase in difference. But UFC 229 can be compared in other aspects to UFC 217. Well, for one, the prelims and the main card on UFC 229, it had less stoppages, way less than UFC 217, as hyped up as that was. It also had less performance of the night bonuses than UFC 217. The champion retained his belts, but we all know what happened at the end of the fight when Khabib won corner and all hell broke loose. The chaos, people jumping over the stage, Khabib jumping over the octagon into the crowd to fuck up Dylan Dennis, DC and Team AKA stepping in, Ali Abdulaziz going in there as well, Khabib's teammates jumping over the fence to punch corner. It was complete chaos. Dana White had to go in to the ring, or the octagon rather, to calm Khabib down. And for the biggest pay-per-view event in UFC history, the fact that we did not see a ceremonial standard wraparound or belt wearing ceremony in that fight will always be a travesty. It will always be a stain on the reputation of that fight card. I honestly believe that fight card and the events that happened after, the events that happened before, leading up to the fight card of UFC 229 and immediately after Khabib's victory, those events, in my personal opinion, are some of the worst ever representation of our beloved sport, mixed martial arts. Terrible. All of them. It's just absolute nonsense that happened on that night. So when you think about it from that perspective, what else does UFC 229 have on UFC 217? There weren't more title fights on the line. It was more toxic, more vitriol, more disrespect between the fighters, less bonuses, less stoppages. And I can make the same argument for UFC 100, UFC 200, UFC 300 as well. None of them have the same arguable variables like UFC 217 and all the things that made UFC 217 that special. And for those of you who haven't seen UFC 217, you might want to take your time and go back and watch it again. Watch the entire fight card. Even if you don't want to watch the entire fight card, including the prelims, please watch the main card. It was something to behold. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my reason and my choice for why UFC 217 is the greatest ever UFC fight card. As of today. Maybe in the future something else might come up. Maybe, I don't know. Right? It probably didn't have as many viral moments as, say, UFC 300 and Max Holloway's KO of Justin Gaethje, but you have to understand something. Social media in 2017 was very different than social media in 2024. I'm just saying. And if you guys feel different or you have a difference of opinion, please, you know how you guys know me. I always say, share your opinions and engage. And let me know what you think. Give me compelling arguments as to why everything I've said in this video to support UFC 217 is wrong. If you've been here this long, I thank you for listening. Please like, share, subscribe, and engage. Mr. TDC will be with you guys on another episode or another presentation of quick clips, depending on what the news is. There wasn't really much great news happening this week. Yeah, there wasn't much going on, right? But I'm glad we could have had this conversation. You guys take care, and I'll see you on the next one. TDC out. Peace.